I'm happy to be here, and I'm glad that the show is at the gallery, and thanks for the plug for the book, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Definitely, yeah. I think it's interesting to be able to see both your work on the wall exhibited and, people coming in are able to see that as well as go through the book in its entirety. I think that there are differences between the ways you present work, whether it's on the wall or in a book, and I think it's nice to be able to see both of those in tandem.
Yeah. Or in this case, Zoom.
Yes, yeah, exactly, or on a screen.
Yeah.
So starting off, I wanted to ask you how you initially came across these communities and what drew you into wanting to photograph them. What interests did you have, and maybe how they changed due to the fact that you've been photographing them for a decade now? And maybe did you have any preconceived ideas or notions of what these events would be like, whether, the events themselves or how your experience would be in these communities?
Yeah. Well, I've been making photographs on the roads of the United States since the year 1990. So that's been my MO. I mean, I live in New York City and I have a busy, responsibility-laden life here, running a press and teaching and being on various boards. So my core of my work done in a given year is typically during the summer, where I take a month and I travel. In the early stages of those trips in the 90s, it was mostly in the South, the Deep South and Southwest. And gradually I've sort of moved from region to region in what feels like an organic way, which is to say, curiosities about the South and its literature and what it looked like gradually evolved and spread west, much like the Great Migration did. And the last 10 years, as you mentioned, except for last year, but for a little over a decade, my focus has been on what I refer to as the Plains states, although also some of the work is a little bit further south and a little bit further west than what's typically thought of as the Plains. I guess there was a time when I was first driving back and forth across country, and I sort of zipped through Wyoming and Montana, and especially Nebraska. Nebraska has the appearance of being sort of homogeneous and plain and flat. Nothing could be further from the truth once one allows oneself to see things. And I think that's the case probably with most things. At a certain point, one's eyes are ready to see things, and then they start to appear. They've probably always been there in some form or another, but the way that I work is to go to a place that I suspect I'll have some interest in, and typically that comes out of a lot of different factors, ideas that I've shared with other artists and friends and writers. Has a lot to do with what I've read. So the literature of a particular place is an important starting point for me. People like A.B. Guthrie and Pete Dexter and Larry McMurtry, and in a more contemporary place, people like Rick Bass and Terry Tempest Williams, all of whom have written amazingly, both fiction and nonfiction, about the West. And so that informs ideas and creates, curiosities and mostly the motivation to go see things for myself. So, in terms of preconceptions, I try to have only the preconception that I'm going to see something that's interesting to me. And then I sort of sort it out after the fact. So the pictures that we're looking at right now, and the book itself, which has 74 pictures in it, the show I think has 20 some, those are really distilled from thousands, no exaggeration, of pictures that I've made over the years. And it's the patterns that I recognize retrospectively after I've made the photographs, when I'm back home in my darkroom in my studio and looking for things that resonate, pictures that resonate with one another, resonate with ideas that I have about the place, with experiences. And then as a sort of closed, almost like a closed circle, learning circle, the experience influences the photographs, which then influence what I know about the place, which then influences the next experience of being in the place, which is why I really try to photograph for years at a time in a particular place, rather than going once and thinking that I've seen it all, because it gets more complicated and nuanced the more that one does it.
Yeah, and that's an interesting way of working. I think there's, typically there's kind of a duality, two opposite sides of the way people work. There's an approach that you have where you kind of just go in head first and photograph madly, gather as much data, as much experience as you can, and process it later. And I think something that has, come to fruition more recently is going in with preconceived ideas, having your statement, having what you want in mind, already thought of while going into taking pictures. And I think that, there's both can be extremes. And I think the happiest place is somewhere in the middle, but it seems like you're able to have initial interests, go in, and then be able to process it later. I think that, it's a realistic way of working as well, especially with your, condensed time frame each year, but then overall over the, years that you spend on projects, ideas come in, it allows ideas to come in fast.
Yeah, I mean, I think I used to be much more in my younger days, um, more of a sort of evangelical or proselytizer about what the right way of working was. And frankly, I don't care anymore how other people work. Whatever works for them. But I do care about how I work, and I work in a very particular way and for particular reasons. And my sense is that I'm much more likely to find things that are resonant with myself, which is important, but also with other people, and that are fresh and that aren't just illustrations of preconceptions if I go in not having many.
Mm-hmm.
I think that anybody who is a decent photographer and is smart enough can sort of fulfill an agenda that they have. I mean, this is so much happening, and the camera is really not, it's not the truth in the way that a lot of people think of it is. It's easily manipulatable, especially with the technology that we have. So if somebody has an agenda, since for instance, let's say somebody felt like they wanted to illustrate an aspect of Western culture or city culture. Let's say somebody came from Montana and had this preconception that New York was a dangerous, unfriendly place. Believe me, there's plenty that they could find to illustrate that preconception. Yeah. But if they came to New York City without that preconception and just rather a rawness and a vulnerability to experience, they might actually learn something about the city that surprises them. That's how I like to travel wherever I go, whether it's out west or the south or anywhere. So my MO has always been to go in open-minded, and I would like to think that my photographs, that they transcend politics and that they transcend preconceptions and mythologies, even though all of that stuff obviously is tied up in and embedded in them. I'd like to think that the pictures go somewhat beyond that. And when somebody looks at these photographs that we're talking about and says, thank you, I hadn't been to these areas, and I hadn't thought of the fact that that the people who might write off for various political reasons are actually struggling, hardworking, people with integrity and rituals and family lives. And that seems kind of shocking to me sometimes. But on the other hand, I get it. People are prejudiced, and that's certainly not how I want to work.